Have you ever felt like you're pouring your heart out for someone, giving your time, love, or energy, only to feel invisible? It's like standing in a crowded room and shouting, but no one even turns to look. If you've ever felt that way, undervalued, unappreciated, or taken for granted, this message is for you. Today, we're diving into timeless wisdom from Zen and Buddhist philosophy that reveals something so simple yet so profound. When someone doesn't value you, step back. Watch what happens. It's not about revenge or anger. It's about reclaiming your peace, your energy, and your self-respect. But here's the twist. The solution isn't loud. It doesn't demand explanations or grand gestures. It's about learning the quiet, transformative power of stepping away, letting go, and turning inward. Let me share a story of a seeker who discovered the strength to let go, and in doing so, found something incredible, themselves. Let's take a moment and step into the shoes of someone I'll call the seeker. The seeker could be any of us. A kind-hearted person who genuinely wants to make the world a better place. They wake up each morning thinking, how can I help today? They're the type of person who's always there for others, whether it's a friend who needs advice, a colleague struggling with a project, or even a stranger who just looks like they need a little kindness. For the seeker, life was all about giving. It wasn't about recognition or getting something in return. No, it was about that quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd made someone's day a little easier or a little brighter. Their kindness was like a warm breeze. You couldn't see it, but you could feel it. And for a while, this brought the seeker a sense of purpose and joy. But then, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. Maybe someone who used to say, "Thank you so much," stopped saying it altogether. Or the friends who used to light up when the seeker walked into the room barely looked up anymore. Bit by bit, the seeker started to feel like they were fading into the background. You know that feeling, right? That sinking realization that no matter how much you give, it doesn't seem to matter anymore. You start to wonder, is it me? Am I doing something wrong? The seeker gave even more, thinking, maybe I'm not trying hard enough. But the harder they tried, the more invisible they felt. And the worst part? They didn't know why. Let's pause here for a second. Can you imagine what that feels like? To be in a room full of people and feel like a ghost? To give your time, your energy, and your heart, only to feel like it's all going unnoticed? Maybe you've been there before. Maybe you're there right now. The seeker started to carry this heavy weight, this constant ache in their chest. They'd lie awake at night replaying conversations, wondering what they'd said or done to make people stop caring. And the thing about this kind of pain is that it doesn't just stay in one corner of your life. It creeps into everything: your work, your relationships, even how you see yourself. But here's the thing. The seeker wasn't the problem. One day, when the weight of it all became too much to bear, the seeker did something they hadn't done before. They reached out for help. They went to their teacher, a wise Zen master known for her deep insights and calm presence. When the seeker sat down in front of the master, they couldn't hold it in anymore. The words spilled out like water from a broken dam. They talked about feeling invisible, about being taken for granted, about the pain of giving and giving without ever feeling seen. The master listened quietly, her face calm and steady. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer quick fixes. She just listened. And when the seeker finally ran out of words, she asked a simple question. "Tell me," the master said, "what happens when you pour water into a cup that's already full?" The seeker blinked, caught off guard. "It overflows," they said, unsure of where this was going. "Exactly," the master replied. "And what happens to the water that overflows?" "It spills out," the seeker said, still confused. The master smiled gently. "You've been pouring your energy and love into cups that are already full. Not full of gratitude or appreciation, but full of their own distractions, their own egos, their own concerns. No matter how much you give, there's no room for it. It's not about you. It's about the cup you're pouring into." Those words hit the seeker like a wave. They'd spent so much time trying to figure out what was wrong with them that they'd never stopped to consider this. Maybe it wasn't about them at all. Think about that for a second. How many times in your life have you blamed yourself for someone else's inability to see your worth? How often have you poured your energy into places where it wasn't valued, only to feel empty and drained in return? The seeker had been doing exactly that. They were trying to fill cups that couldn't hold what they had to offer, and the master's words gave them permission to stop. But it wasn't just about stopping. It was about stepping back and asking, "Where is my energy truly appreciated?" The seeker began to realize that self-worth isn't about convincing others to see your value. It's about knowing your value, even when others don't. And that realization, it was like a weight being lifted off their shoulders. The seeker wasn't invisible. They weren't unworthy. They were just pouring into the wrong cups. Now, let's bring this back to you. Do you see yourself in the seeker's story? Have you ever been in a place, whether it's a relationship, a job, or even a friendship, where you felt like no matter what you did, it was never enough? Here's the truth. You are enough. Always have been. Always will be. The problem isn't you. It's the cups you're pouring into. And just like the seeker, you have the power to step back, to redirect your energy, and to reclaim your peace. Because at the end of the day, your worth doesn't depend on how others see you. It depends on how you see yourself. Picture this. You're standing at your kitchen sink, holding a cup that's already brimming with water. You turn on the tap and let the water flow. But instead of going into the cup, it spills over the sides, splashing onto the counter, the floor, everywhere but where it's supposed to go. Now, no matter how long you keep that water running, the cup won't hold a single drop more. This is the image the Zen master painted for the seeker, a simple yet profound analogy for what they'd been doing all along. The master's voice was calm, her words measured. "Tell me," she asked the seeker, "what happens when you pour water into a cup that's already full?" The seeker hesitated for a moment, unsure of the point, but then replied, "It overflows." "And the water that overflows?" the master continued, her gaze steady. "It's wasted," the seeker admitted, starting to see where this might be going. The master nodded, her expression soft but firm. "Exactly. You've been pouring your energy, your kindness, your love, your wisdom, into cups that are already full, but not full of gratitude or appreciation. No, these cups are full of distractions, pride, ego, and maybe even indifference. They can't hold what you're offering. And yet, you keep pouring, hoping that somehow it'll make a difference. Can you see why this leaves you feeling so drained? Let's stop for a second and think about this. How often do we do this in our own lives? How often do we give everything we have, our time, energy, love, and effort, to people or situations that simply don't have the space to hold it? Maybe it's a friend who only calls when they need something, but never when you do. Or a partner who seems too caught up in their own world to notice your needs. Or Maybe it's a workplace that takes your hard work for granted, piling more onto your plate without so much as a thank you. We keep pouring and pouring, hoping that if we just give a little more, things will change. But just like that overflowing cup, there's no room for what we're offering, and the more we give, the more it spills out, wasted. Here's the thing the Master wanted the seeker to understand, and it's something we all need to hear. It's not about you. When someone doesn't value what you're offering, it doesn't mean you're not valuable. It doesn't mean you're not enough. It simply means their cup is full, with their own distractions, priorities, or even their own pain. Think about it this way. Imagine trying to have a deep conversation with someone who's glued to their phone. It's not that what you're saying isn't important, it's that they're too distracted to hear it. The problem isn't you, it's where their attention is focused. But let's be honest. Knowing it's not about you doesn't make it hurt any less, does it? The seeker felt that pain deeply. They had given so much of themselves, so much time, love, and effort, only to feel like none of it mattered. And the Master's analogy, while enlightening, also hit a nerve. The seeker realized just how much energy they'd been wasting, pouring into cups that couldn't hold it. Can you imagine that moment of realization? It's bittersweet. On one hand, you understand why you feel so drained, so unseen. On the other hand, you're forced to confront the hard truth that maybe, just maybe, you've been pouring into the wrong places all along. But here's the beautiful part. Once you recognize this pattern, you have the power to change it. The Master explained to the seeker, the solution isn't to stop giving. It's to be mindful of where you pour your energy. Find cups that are ready to receive. Pour into people, places, and situations that can hold what you offer. Those who appreciate it, value it, and return it in kind. For the seeker, this was a revelation. They'd spent so long trying to fill cups that were already full, they hadn't even considered looking for ones that were empty and waiting. Now, let me ask you, where are you pouring your energy right now? Are you giving your time and love to people who cherish it, or to those who barely notice it? Are you investing in relationships and environments that uplift you, or ones that leave you feeling depleted? Take a moment to reflect on this, because just like the seeker, you deserve to pour your energy into places where it will be valued. As the seeker walked away from that conversation with the Master, they felt a shift, not just in their perspective, but in their heart. They realized they didn't need to stop being kind or giving. They just needed to be more mindful about where they directed that kindness. And you can do the same. Stop pouring into cups that are already full. Redirect your energy to places where it can flow freely, where it can nourish and be appreciated. Because when you do that, you'll not only feel lighter, you'll also create space for the kind of connections and experiences that truly enrich your life. This expanded section uses relatable examples, emotional depth, and conversational language to engage the audience while driving home the profound lesson of the full cup analogy. It's designed to resonate with viewers on a personal level and inspire them to take actionable steps in their own lives. Let me know if you'd like the further adjustments or additions. Let me share with you a story, a parable that has been passed down through the wisdom of Zen masters. It's about a pearl, but as you'll see, it's really about you and me. Once, there was a pearl of breathtaking beauty. Imagine it, perfectly round, shimmering in the light, its brilliance unmatched. Those who first discovered it were awestruck. They couldn't stop marveling at its perfection. "Look at this treasure," they exclaimed. How rare, how priceless. For a while, the pearl was cherished. It was admired, protected, and valued. But as time passed, the pearl changed hands. First one owner, then another, and then another. Each time, the sense of awe faded a little more. Eventually, the pearl was seen as just another stone. Let's pause here. Have you ever experienced that? Being valued at first, only to feel like, over time, people began to take you for granted. It's not that you've changed. You're still the same kind, caring, and thoughtful person you've always been. But for some reason, others stop seeing the light you bring into their lives. The pearl didn't lose its brilliance. Its glow didn't dim. The problem wasn't the pearl. It was the people who held it. They became so accustomed to its beauty that they stopped appreciating it. Does that sound familiar? It's such a common human experience, isn't it? To give your best, your love, your time, your talents, and yet feel like the people around you no longer notice, no longer care. Now, here's where the story gets interesting. The pearl didn't know it was a pearl. It had no sense of its own value. It began to believe that the way people treated it determined how much it was worth. When it was admired, it thought, "I must be valuable." But when it was tossed aside, it wondered, "Am I just an ordinary stone?" How often do we do the same thing? We tie our sense of worth to how others treat us. If they praise us, we feel amazing. But if they ignore us or take us for granted, we start to question ourselves. Am I enough? Am I valuable? But here's the truth. Your worth doesn't come from others' opinions. It comes from within. The pearl was always priceless, no matter how it was treated. And so are you. The Zen master used this parable to teach the seeker a profound lesson. Your worth is not determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you see yourself. The people who stopped valuing the pearl didn't take away its beauty. Their inability to see its worth said more about them than it did about the pearl. And here's the key. Just like the pearl, you don't need to convince others of your value. Your light, your brilliance, your beauty. They're already there. Whether someone notices it or not doesn't change what you are. As the master finished the story, the seeker sat in silence, letting the words sink in. For so long, they had been chasing validation, pouring all their energy into trying to make others see their worth. But the parable of the pearl made them realize something important. They didn't need to. The seeker's worth didn't depend on whether others appreciated it. It was always there, unchanging, inherent. Let me ask you something. Where in your life have you been like the pearl? Where have you been shining your light, giving your all, only to feel ignored or overlooked? And how has that made you question your worth? Here's what I want you to take away from this story. You are the pearl. Your value isn't tied to who notices you or who doesn't. It's not about how others treat you. It's about knowing your worth deep down and never letting anyone else define it for you. The pearl didn't stop being beautiful just because some people treated it like a stone. And you don't stop being valuable just because someone fails to see your worth. Remember this. Their inability to see your value is their loss, not yours. As the seeker walked away from that lesson, they felt lighter, freer. For the first time, they understood that their worth wasn't something they had to earn or prove. It was something they carried within them, always. And you can do the same. Stop trying to convince others of your value. Stop waiting for their recognition. Instead, start recognizing yourself. You are the pearl, brilliant, rare, and priceless. Never forget that. This expanded version of the parable brings it to life with vivid imagery, relatable emotions, and actionable insights. It's designed to connect with viewers on a personal level, encouraging them to reflect on their own worth and how they perceive it. Let me know if you'd like additional layers or adjustments. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to explain yourself to someone who just doesn't want to listen? Or maybe you've argued your case, hoping that somehow they'd understand your worth, only to feel even more frustrated and unseen. It's exhausting, isn't it? This is where the Zen master introduced the seeker to a counterintuitive but incredibly powerful idea: silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from being ignored, but a deliberate, intentional silence. A silence that speaks louder than any words ever could. The master told the seeker, "When someone doesn't value you, don't argue, don't plead, and don't demand explanations. Instead, step back, step away. Let your absence do the talking." Now, let's think about that for a moment. In our everyday lives, we're taught to confront issues head-on, to have that conversation, to make others see our side of things. But what if sometimes the most impactful thing you can do is to say nothing at all? When you step back in silence, something incredible happens. You create a void, a space that others can't help but notice. Your absence becomes louder than your presence ever was. And in that silence, people are forced to reflect. The seeker hesitated when they first heard this advice. But how will they understand if I don't explain myself? Won't they just forget about me altogether? The master smiled gently. Sometimes, words fall on deaf ears. People don't hear you because they're too busy with their own noise. But silence is impossible to ignore. It's not about making them feel guilty or getting them to chase after you. It's about reclaiming your energy and creating space for reflection, both theirs and yours. And that's the beauty of silence. It doesn't demand, it doesn't plead. It simply exists, creating a powerful shift in the dynamic. Imagine this. The seeker, who had always been there for everyone, suddenly decided to step back. No dramatic announcements, no harsh words, just quiet withdrawal. They stopped offering unsolicited help. They stopped trying to fix things. The seeker began to understand that by holding on to what no longer served them, they were closing themselves off to new possibilities. But by letting go, they were creating space. Space for new relationships, new opportunities, and new growth. This doesn't mean forgetting the past or pretending it didn't matter. It means honoring it for what it was, and then releasing it with gratitude. The master shared one final thought. When the tree lets go of its leaves, it doesn't cry for what it's losing. It trusts that new leaves will grow in their place, and when they do, the tree will stand just as tall, just as strong. For the seeker, this was the ultimate lesson. Letting go wasn't about weakness. It was about trust. Trust in the natural flow of life. Trust in their own resilience. And trust that what was meant for them would find its way. Now, let's bring this lesson back to you. Where in your life are you clinging to something that no longer serves you? Is it a relationship that feels one-sided? A job that drains you? Or maybe it's an old version of yourself that you've outgrown. What would happen if you let go? If you trusted that by releasing what no longer fits, you'd make room for something better? Remember, impermanence isn't here to punish you. It's here to free you. As the seeker walked away from the master's lesson, they felt a new sense of lightness. They no longer feared change. They no longer saw letting go as a loss. Instead, they saw it as an act of courage, an invitation to grow. And you can do the same. Be like the tree, give your best while you can. But when it's time to let go, do it with grace. Trust that just as the falling leaves make way for new growth, letting go will make space for something beautiful in your life. Let's talk about a phrase so simple yet so transformative, it can change the way you see yourself. I am enough. At first glance, it might seem like just another affirmation. One of those things you say to yourself in the mirror, hoping it'll stick. But when the seeker first heard this mantra from their Zen master, it wasn't just a phrase. It was a lifeline, a revelation, a truth they hadn't dared to believe. Have you ever found yourself doubting your value? Maybe it's after someone you care about dismisses your feelings, or when your hard work goes unacknowledged, or even in those quiet moments when you're alone with your thoughts. For many of us, self-worth feels like something we have to earn. We think, if only I could do more, achieve more, or be more, then I'd finally feel worthy. But here's the problem. Tying your self-worth to external things, people's opinions, achievements, or recognition, is like building a house on shifting sand. It's unstable, exhausting, and never truly satisfying. This was the seeker's struggle. They had spent so much time trying to prove their worth to others, hoping for validation, that they had forgotten to look within. One day, the Zen master gave the seeker a new practice. Whenever you start to doubt yourself, she said, whenever you feel unseen or unappreciated, repeat these 3 words. I am enough. Say it aloud. Whisper it in your heart. Carry it with you like a lantern in the dark. At first, the seeker was skeptical. How could something so simple make a difference? But the master explained, this mantra isn't about convincing others of your worth. It's about reminding yourself of what has always been true, that your value is not something you earn. It's something you already have. The seeker began to practice. At first, it felt strange, almost awkward to say the words out loud. I am enough. But they kept going. Every time they felt unappreciated, they whispered it. Every time self-doubt crept in, they repeated it. And slowly, something began to shift. Here's the thing about repetition. The more you say something, the more your brain starts to believe it. And for the seeker, this simple phrase became a lifeline, a way to anchor themselves in their own truth, even when the world around them felt uncertain. The mantra also helped the seeker realize something profound. Their worth wasn't tied to what others thought of them. Think about it. How often do we base our self-esteem on external validation? A compliment makes us feel amazing, but one critical comment can ruin our day. A like on social media boosts our confidence, but silence feels like rejection. The seeker learned that this constant search for approval was exhausting and unnecessary. By repeating, I am enough, they began to break free from the need for external validation. They started to understand that their worth wasn't something others could give or take away. It was something they carried within them, always. The seeker's mantra didn't just stay in their mind, it became a daily practice. When they woke up in the morning, they'd start the day with a deep breath and say, I am enough. When they faced a challenge at work or in their relationships, they'd pause, ground themselves, and repeat, I am enough. And at night, as they reflected on the day, they'd whisper it again, letting the words settle into their heart. This wasn't just about building confidence, it was about building resilience. The mantra became a shield against self-doubt, a reminder that no matter what happened, they were already complete. Something amazing happened as the seeker embraced this mantra. they began to notice a quiet strength growing within them, a kind of unshakable confidence that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. They started to set boundaries, saying no to things that drained their energy, and yes to what truly mattered. They stopped apologizing for taking up space, for having needs, or for being themselves. And perhaps most importantly, they stopped chasing. They stopped chasing people, situations, or achievements that didn't align with their truth. Instead, they focused on what brought them peace and joy. Now, let me ask you, how often do you remind yourself that you're enough? If you're anything like the seeker, you have probably spent years looking outside yourself for validation, trying to earn your worth through achievements, relationships, or the approval of others. But what if you didn't have to? What if, right now, you could stop and say, "I am enough," and actually believe it? This isn't just about feeling good in the moment. It's about changing the way you see yourself, the way you move through the world. When you believe that you're enough, you stop settling for less. You stop tolerating relationships or situations that don't honor your value. You start living in alignment with your truth. And here's the most beautiful part. When you carry this belief within you, it radiates outward. Others begin to see and respect the self-worth you've claimed for yourself. If this idea resonates with you, here's a simple practice to try. Start your day with the mantra. Before you check your phone, before the world gets loud, take a moment to ground yourself. Say, "I am enough." Use it as a reset button. Anytime self-doubt creeps in or you feel undervalued, pause and repeat the mantra to yourself. End your day with gratitude. As you reflect on your day, remind yourself that your worth doesn't depend on what you accomplished or how others treated you. You are enough, just as you are. For the seeker, this mantra became more than words. It became a way of life. It freed them from the need to prove themselves, from the endless chase for approval, and in that freedom, they found peace. So, let me leave you with this. You are enough. Not because of what you do, not because of what others think, but simply because you are. Say it. Believe it. Carry it with you. Because when you embrace your inherent worth, you'll find that everything else, peace, confidence, joy, starts to fall into place. Let's take a moment to imagine this. You've been carrying a heavy backpack for years. It's filled with expectations, doubts, responsibilities that don't belong to you, and the weight of other people's opinions. Day after day, you've been hauling this load, convinced that you have to carry it. But what if you stopped? What if you set it down and walked forward with nothing but your own truth? That's what the seeker did. After years of giving, chasing, and trying to prove their worth, they decided to carve a new path. A path not defined by others, but by their own sense of self-worth and peace. Here's the thing about change. It's scary. The familiar, even when it's painful, feels safe. Letting go, stepping back and choosing yourself, that takes courage. For the seeker, this journey wasn't easy. They had spent so much of their life tied to the approval of others, to being needed, to feeling like their worth was something they had to earn. But when they started to step away from those old patterns, they discovered something incredible. Freedom. They realized that life wasn't about carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. It was about walking their own path, light, unburdened, and free to grow. So, what does it actually mean to walk a new path? For the seeker, it started with one simple question. What truly brings me peace? Think about that for a moment. How often do you ask yourself that question? And when you do, how often do you actually listen to the answer? The seeker began to make choices based on that question. They said no to relationships and situations that drained their energy. They stopped chasing after people who didn't value them. Instead, they focused on what filled their cup, whether that was quiet moments of reflection, nurturing meaningful connections, or simply spending time doing things that made their heart feel light. A big part of walking this new path was learning to set boundaries. And let's be honest, boundaries can feel awkward, even selfish at first. But the seeker learned that boundaries aren't about keeping people out. They're about protecting what's sacred within you. For example, the seeker used to say yes to everything, even when it meant sacrificing their own well-being. But now, they started to pause and ask, is this something I truly want to give my energy to? If the answer was no, they declined, with kindness but also with confidence. And here's the magical part. The more they honored their boundaries, the more they felt their own worth growing. Let's talk about the power of saying no. It's not easy, is it? We're taught to be agreeable, to keep the peace, to avoid disappointing others. But every time you say yes to something that drains you, you're saying no to yourself. The seeker realized this. They learned that saying no wasn't about being rude or selfish. It was about self-respect. And the amazing thing, when they started saying no to what didn't align with their values, they found more space for the things that did. What about you? Where in your life do you need to say no so you can say yes to yourself? As the seeker walked this new path, they also turned their focus inward. They began a daily practice of meditation and mindfulness, not as a way to escape the world, but as a way to connect with their inner self. Through these quiet moments, they peeled back layers of doubt, insecurity, and fear. They started to see themselves not as someone who needed to prove their worth, but as someone who was inherently valuable, just as they were. And you know what's incredible? When you start to see yourself that way, the world begins to reflect it back to you. Walking a new path also means learning to embrace joy. For so long, the seeker had been so focused on what others needed, they had forgotten to ask, what brings me joy? So they began to explore, whether it was walking in nature, picking up a forgotten hobby, or simply sitting in silence with a cup of tea. These small moments of joy became sacred, and as they embraced them, they also cultivated gratitude, not just for the good things in their life, but for the lessons they had learned along the way. Of course, walking a new path also meant letting go of the past. The seeker learned to release the weight of old grudges, regrets, and disappointments. Here's how the Zen master explained it. Holding on to the past is like carrying a heavy bag of stones. Each one represents a moment of pain, a memory of rejection, or a fear of failure. But what happens when you put the bag down? The seeker smiled, feeling the truth of those words. They didn't need to carry those stones anymore. They could honor the past for the lessons it brought, but leave the weight behind. Finally, the seeker embraced the beauty of the unknown. Walking a new path meant stepping into uncertainty, not knowing exactly where it would lead. But instead of fearing it, they found it exciting. Each step was an opportunity to discover something new, about the world, about others, and about themselves. And that's the truth about life, isn't it? The best paths aren't the ones that are already mapped out. They're the ones we create as we walk. So now I ask you, what would your new path look like? If you stopped chasing validation, if you set down the weight of others' expectations, if you listened to what truly brings you peace, where would that take you? Remember, It's never too late to change direction. It's never too late to choose yourself. And as the seeker learned, the moment you take that first step, you'll feel a lightness you haven't felt in years. As the seeker walked their new path, they didn't just find peace, they found themselves. And that's what I hope for you. Your journey is yours to shape. So, take a deep breath. Let go of what's holding you back, and start walking forward, one step at a time, toward the life you truly deserve. As we reach the end of this journey, let's pause and take a moment to reflect on the lessons we've explored, the wisdom shared, and how all of this ties back to you. Ask yourself, where in your life do you feel unseen or undervalued? Is it in a relationship where you're giving everything but getting little in return? Is it at work, where your efforts seem to go unnoticed? Or maybe it's even in how you treat yourself, putting others' needs ahead of your own, over and over again. Now, here's the real question. What are you willing to do about it? Let me tell you something you may not hear enough. You deserve to be valued. Not just by others, but by yourself. You are not here to be overlooked, to be taken for granted, or to pour all of your energy into people and situations that don't appreciate it. But here's the catch. Recognizing your value starts with you. It starts with how you see yourself, how you treat yourself, and what you're willing to tolerate. And that's where everything we've talked about today comes full circle. We've seen how stepping back, quietly, without drama, can create a ripple effect. It allows others to reflect on your absence and realize what they've been taking for granted. But more importantly, it gives you the space to heal, to grow, and to rediscover your worth. This isn't about revenge or teaching anyone a lesson. It's about choosing peace over exhaustion, self-respect over self-sacrifice, and balance over chaos. And yes, stepping back can feel scary at first. You might wonder, what if they don't notice? What if they don't care? But here's the truth. Even if no one notices, even if no one comes back, you'll have gained something far more important, yourself. We've also talked about letting go, the art of releasing people, situations, and even old versions of yourself that no longer serve you. This isn't an act of giving up. It's an act of liberation. Think about the tree we talked about earlier. When it lets go of its leaves, it doesn't grieve for what's falling away. It trusts that new growth will come in its own time. What would happen if you did the same? If you stopped clinging to what's no longer meant for you and started creating space for what's next? And then there's the mantra, I am enough. This simple phrase holds so much power. It's a reminder that your worth isn't tied to how others see you. It's not something you have to prove or earn. It's already there, inherent and unchanging. The seeker carried this mantra with them, repeating it every time self-doubt crept in. And over time, it became their truth. It can be yours too. So let me ask you again. Where in your life do you need to reclaim your peace? Where do you need to step back, let go, or simply remind yourself, I am enough? This journey we've taken together today, it's not just a story, it's an invitation. An invitation to look at your own life with fresh eyes, to reflect on where you're giving too much and receiving too little, and to choose a new path forward. You have the power to change your story. You have the power to set boundaries, to let go of what doesn't serve you, and to build a life where your energy is valued and your worth is honored. But it all starts with a choice to put yourself first, to protect your peace, and to remember that you are enough, just as you are. As we wrap up, I want you to hold on to this. You are like the pearl in the story. Not ordinary, not replaceable, but brilliant and unique. Whether others recognize that or not doesn't change your value. So, step back when you need to. Let go when it's time. And walk forward with confidence, knowing that your worth is not defined by anyone else. It's defined by you. Thank you for being here, for taking this time to reflect, and for being open to this journey. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to let it settle in. And if you're ready to share your thoughts or your own experiences, I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, you are enough, always.